talk about a little bit about the cloud, Microsoft Azure, and a project that we did with the RNC. Just three topics that we're just going to hit are going to be what is the cloud, talk about Microsoft Azure, and RNC's Azure migration. So we're going to start with some Cloud 101. Is everybody familiar or not familiar with these three terms on the board here on the slide? IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. These are the kind of three pillars of cloud, if you will. So we'll start with IaaS, which is infrastructure as a service, right? And so this is like putting your, building your infrastructure in a cloud provider. I want you to think of having total control over the environment. Some examples of these are like the Azure virtual machines. I'm going to try not to move once it starts working. Azure virtual machines, virtual network infrastructure, and some Active Directory domains. And some words that I want you to think about are like your environment or setting up your environment. Moving into PaaS, that's platform as a service. So these are going to be the tools that you use to build something out in the cloud. Some examples specific to Azure are Azure SQL Database or Amazon's Elastic, I think it's called Elastic DB, Azure SQL Data Warehouse, things like this. And the words I want you to associate with that are tools or to build something out. And finally, software as a service. These are going to be specific services or software that you provision in the cloud that you use, that you don't really do a lot of fine tuning with. It's just a software package that you're subscribed to that you use. And think about like Office 365 as a software as a service package, or Salesforce, or the Azure portal, a software as a service to manage your software as a services. And some words to think about would be like a product or to use something. So those are the three pillars, but what is it really, right? My best definition, or my attempt at a definition, is that it's a hosted environment using other people's hardware. Website and other hosting companies have been doing this for years, right? So what's really the difference? But this is... well, I have it defined here, a definition. It's a constantly evolving, hosted suite of infrastructure, platforms, and software that are used to build new applications and environments. And what's specifically different, I feel, is that a lot of these products are really geared towards data consumption or reporting and interconnectivity between your services that you're provisioning. And well, why does it matter? Well, the cloud is just getting huge, right? You have a couple big players with hundreds of data centers that are still being spawned up. I mean, AWS, Azure, and Google all are slated to have new facilities opening in 2017, in addition to what they already have, which is global. IT infrastructure professionals should be really hyped because they can now build environments from a seemingly endless pool of resources, right? The sky is the limit, no pun intended. They can do this quickly. They can do it using familiar interfaces like web portals, command line interfaces, or PowerShell, which we'll see in a little bit. And they can do it in a product line that continues to evolve. These companies, Amazon and Microsoft, they're always throwing the latest and greatest products out there in their cloud for you to consume. Developers can be excited because they have access to all the resources they need, and they can provision more services as needed. With really if you have a subscription to Azure, you can put anything you want up there as long as you have a credit card on file. And outages and upgrades pertaining to your hardware are really all managed by your provider. They're doing all that stuff behind the scenes, rotating hardware in and out to get new, like I said, the latest and greatest up there. And one little note that I wanted to mention is that Amazon has, I saw today, they have at least 50,000 physical servers in each of their data centers that they are building out. And each region has multiple data centers in that. So just think about that. We're talking about massive, massive scale of physical servers and failovers and availability groups, all managed by your cloud provider. So switching into Microsoft Azure. Microsoft Azure has offerings in all three of the as a service kind of pillars, and they're using many different technologies. Basically anything Microsoft you can find in Microsoft Azure now. But something that's interesting is that they're also embracing other technologies outside of Microsoft, which is something that we didn't normally see previously. So something like Linux virtual machines or Oracle database in Azure, who'd have thought? JavaScript and all of the blank JS extensions in Azure websites, and also open source big data technologies like Hadoop, Spark, and R. Microsoft Azure also is spanning the globe. As you can see from the little graphic I have up there, they have data centers or regions in just about every continent. And you can set up geographic redundancy within Azure to give yourself 99.95% uptime SLA if configured to spec. That's a little asterisk that I'll talk about in a little bit. So here's a little graphic, and I don't know how well you can see it in the back, but bear with me here. This is a graphic. Can I move closer with this? Hello. Cool. Just showing the different ways in which you can use Azure. I'm going to speak louder now. That you can use Azure to consume data and build out an environment within Azure using, this is mostly platform as a service and software as a service, but nonetheless, a typical infrastructure of consuming data here at your lower level with different products that you have, Azure SQL and Azure Data Lakes, and then moving up through the different layers until you get to your end users and their consumption points, right? Just let that soak in for a minute. A lot of different products. So moving on. This is the Gartner's Magic Quadrant for infrastructure as a service providers. Now, right now, they don't have it broken down. They don't have Magic Quadrants for PaaS and SaaS, but I suspect in the coming years they will. What you'll see, though, is Amazon, and this isn't to scale by their market share. Amazon has 10 times the amount of infrastructure that the other 14 cloud providers have put together. And they're still building, right? But as I mentioned too earlier, that you have Rackspace and some of these other guys that traditionally do, or that they were traditionally in the kind of infrastructure as a service, and they're kind of in the niche players quadrant of the Magic Quadrant. Just an interesting graphic, I think. And Google is coming up behind with their product line that was as creative as Google is. They couldn't come up with anything better than Google Cloud. But they're on their way. So what are some negatives with the cloud, right? Well, for one, you have no physical control over your environment. Now, for some people, that's a benefit. For some, that's a con, right? Some people like to plug in all the wires and make sure everything's working as expected. But with Azure, you're kind of throwing it over the fence and hoping that it's working as expected. Another thing is the cost. You'll see from these images here that it can get expensive, like really expensive per month. The biggest machine that they have is a GS5, and before you put disks, solid-state drives, solid-state disks to the machine, you're looking at a baseline of $6,500 per month just to have that machine up there. And this is this is the cost before you take into account SQL Server licenses and your disk sizes, right? And then there's also the fact that you're charged monthly and or by usage. So, for example, virtual machines are charged by uptime, whereas Event Hub is charged 2.8 cents per million events, right? So with all this stuff that you're spinning up, you sometimes get the idea that you're getting nickel and dimed everywhere. You don't know where your money's going, but at the same time, they provide this nice breakdown of, at the end of the month, or actually during the month, of where your charges are being incurred, and you can kind of see that all in one sum at the end. So here's a quick question. How quickly can you acquire and begin working with a machine with the following specs? It needs to have 20 CPU cores, has to have 140 gigabytes of RAM, 1 terabyte of storage, running Windows Server 2016, and have SQL Server 2016 Enterprise running on it. And have you also thought about any licenses that you need to acquire? Well, your network infrastructure, or a physical place to put this server, right? Well, with the Azure, within Azure, and I'm going to switch to a quick demo here, I'll show you how quickly you can do that and how seamlessly I can switch screens. There we go. So I'm going to flip over to a PowerShell script, and I'm going to bring up the Azure portal, which, if you haven't seen it, this is the Azure portal. And I'm going to click into my virtual machines tab, and we can see that there's no virtual machines there, right? But now the question was, how quickly can you do it? I'm going to execute this. I'm going to execute this. I'm going to log into my Azure account. Now, I purposely set some of this stuff up so that it would go pretty quick, so I might be gaming the system a little bit. I'm going to set an admin account for the machine, and this is just gonna start working. It's like magic. It's really not. But you can see that through PowerShell, just doing some. Oh, I failed. Another failed demo. It's not the first time that that's happened. But you can see if the demo went as according to plan, that it's pretty straightforward, pretty easy to do. The idea was to have that running. Let me see if I can do this again. I'm going to log into my Azure account. I'm going to set the admin account for the machine. We're going to refresh here. And now we're creating. Cool. That one went better than the last time I failed. So this is being provisioned right now. Through a couple keystrokes, we're there. I'm going to let this provision, and I'm going to switch back to what I actually did in this PowerShell script. And I'm not going to go line by line, but I'll talk a little bit about it for those PowerShell nuts in the crowd here. Really just setting some variables, starting with logging into your Azure account, getting the name of what you're subscribed to, the subscriptions that are associated with your Azure account, setting some setting some variables, and then finally running through some Azure-specific PowerShell commandlets. A really cool view is actually in the command add-on, and you can do, if you just hit Azure, you can see all of the different Azure-related commandlets that you can run, and one of them, Azure Storage Account, right? Azure RM Storage Account. So that should, yeah. That didn't come up with what I was expecting, but yeah, it's all there. Moving right along, setting some other details before finally provisioning the VM, and in a graphical format. Here's what we did. We set up a resource group, which is your overall container for services that you want to put in that resource group. We provisioned a storage account and then a virtual network. And within those, we put your virtual machine and an OS disk and a data disk to meet that requirement of the 1 terabyte data disk additionally. So if I flip back now, I think it should be done. Anybody have a timer going on that? Oh, it's not done yet. All right, we'll check back on this at the end just to show that it really was a couple keystrokes. Let's see if we can connect. It might be there, it might not. All right, we'll wait. Switching back. So we talked about Azure. Let's talk now about the RNC. So For those of you who aren't aware of who the RNC is, they're the Republican National Committee. They are the kind of overseers of all things Republican. So they have their Republican manifesto on their website that you can read about how much they hate the Democrats. Our first engagement with them was in the 2012 election cycle, and we assisted them in creating a new reporting environment. But since then, since that 2012 cycle, they had some pretty big problems. They had an outdated and failing on-premise infrastructure. They had machines in their basement that they were struggling to keep working by replacing hardware whenever they could. It was a mess, right? And their outages were disrupting these daily processes. The second problem they had was they had data everywhere. They had a couple different servers with different endpoints for different types of reporting, and they couldn't tell somebody to get data in a specific spot with confidence. So our goals, in related to those two problems, were to first migrate them up to Azure, get them out of the basement and into the cloud before the election cycle really started moving. And our second goal was to re-platform the RNC's data warehouses, I meant to put quotes around that, data warehouses, and reporting environments. And the goal of that was to consolidate all of these different endpoints into a single dimensional data store and unified reporting layer, unified presentation layer that they could then solve that issue of saying, you want this voter data, you can go to this spot to get it. A single touch point for getting data for all of their internal and external customers who they serve. So some of the challenges around this, which there were several, and paring that down was kind of tough, was that they had 10 to 20 terabytes of data across 300 different databases on different servers. So getting all that out of the basement and into the cloud was difficult. They had an outbound network speed limited to 10 megabytes per second. And if you do the math, it comes out to 12 days of 24-hour constant uploads, which is hard to achieve when you have frequent network blips that are causing file transfer failures over the wire, right? They had an issue with the U.S. Postal Service National Change of Address license migration. The postmaster had an issue with moving up to Azure. I don't think he had a lot of confidence in doing that migration. And they also had link servers everywhere. Now, link servers are a debatable, object in SQL Server, right? They're very useful when you need to use them. They become super hairy when you start having them everywhere and you have this server connecting to this one, but then a process that actually links back, and you don't know where you're getting that data from, right? So we aim to get rid of all that. So here's just a little graphic of what their environment looked like. They had a couple servers in DC, and then had a couple servers co-located in Tennessee. And the main one that they were having a problem with was one particular production server that just kept failing over and over again. And so what did we do? What did CCG do? Well, we migrated their infrastructure, databases, and processes onto Azure Virtual Machines. So we went the IaaS route by spinning up virtual machines in Azure and moving everything from on-premise to the cloud. We did this by using a tool that Microsoft provides called AZ Copy. Really neat tool for moving large files from from on-premise to a blob storage account. But for large databases, which were greater than 1 terabyte, we actually had to, Azure has a process called the Azure import job, and we had to mail a hard drive to an Azure data center using this process. It was an encrypted drive. Mail it to the data center, they plug the hard drive in, and then they upload your data to the cloud that way. Kind of neat process. Happy that we don't have to do that again. We also did lots of machine and disk sizing exercises, finding out what the right size for a particular machine was, and then spinning that up in Azure. And finally, we did an Azure SQL Data Warehouse proof of concept, which is kind of neat. I didn't get too much hands-on with it, but I do want to go back and revisit that. And some of the graphics up here are just some screenshots I took while moving, and you can see some really cool throughput numbers, like for example, 1443 megabits per second over the wire when talking Azure Virtual Machine to Azure Virtual Machine. Just some other neat metrics. So we took their infrastructure from from how I showed you before to putting it all into a single region where everything could talk to each other. We also got them to invest in 2 additional reporting servers that they have Power BI and an SSAS instance on there, right? Like,
Not Power BI.
not Power BI. SSAS, tabular and SSAS. There you go, that's the word I was looking for. And so to recap, we talked about the different types of cloud services. We talked about IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS and how they were different. Gave you some fundamental Azure knowledge. I did a virtual machine provisioning demo, which we'll look back at in just a second. And we talked about the RNC's Azure migration. Let me flip back to that real quick. We can look at this virtual machine. All right, so we can see that it's running now. Just going to connect. No. If I type that in right. And so like that, at the push of a button, we have our server up there. Up there. Cool. And it's actually Windows Server 2016 too, which I thought was kind of neat. I had never seen it or messed around with it until putting all this together. And just to verify that it's got everything we wanted, we can check here. See, it's got all 20 cores. And I'll just pop into Management Studio real quick. If that wants to load. Any questions so far? Perfect time for questions. Okay.
Those things only are the dollar bills.
These are the dollar bills, yes. just going by, second by second. So we've got, it comes already, the image that I chose to spin up with this had SQL 2016, it had everything, it had SQL 2016 and Windows Server 2016 kind of as part of that image. Cool. We'll check on that again in a minute, because I'm impatient. So, what's next then? Well, learn Azure. It's up there. It's easy to use. I demonstrated with PowerShell how you can quickly spin something up, right? Microsoft has something called the Azure Learning Paths, which if you check it out, you can see the different learning paths for just about everything. So if I want to learn app service, oh, that's not up there. This one, sorry, Azure Learning Paths. And if I want to learn about Azure Web Apps, I'm going to come here, and it gives me the exact path that they deem is the best way to learn, but still a guideline for how you could go about learning this stuff, right? If you sign up for Azure, you get a $200 credit with your account, which they give you. I saw the list somewhere. It tells you exactly what you can spin up with that $200 in a month, and it's like a 10 terabyte SQL data warehouse and any number of things that you can spin up. And I just wanted to revisit this graphic again one more time, just to show the how you could use Azure in kind of any scenario, right? To ingest data from the source and go all the way to your users.